The story I am about to tell you is about the outfit Rackets, the men who ran them, why they lost them, and who controls them today, and also includes my story. 1885. They set up shop in the black community of Bronzeville on the south side. Players tried to guess three numbers from 1 through 78 that were drawn from a tumbling drum or a wheel. A 2-number betting combination was called a saddle, and a 3-number combination a gig, and a 4-number combination a horse. And the odds were high on the 4-number combination, and bets were taken at cigarette stores, garages, barber shops, and apartments. Policy offices were set up anywhere they could find space. The game flourished, and by 1938, $18 million a year was being bet on Chicago policy wheels. It was estimated that there were 4,200 policy stations and 100,000 people played on the west and south sides of the city. It was big business. There were many policy kings across Chicago over the years. Here are just a few. John Mushmouth Johnson became known as the Black Gambling King of Chicago. Johnson was involved in gambling for nearly 25 years. He organized and expanded the policy racket here in Chicago. He opened his own nickel gaming house on Clark Street in the 1880s, and he amassed a fortune running illegal gambling operations, including policy from the mid-1880s through 1907. He was a nightclub owner and a savvy businessman and a political operator. He was smart. He dumped his illegal income into legitimate businesses, and he bought protection from politicians. He amassed a fortune, and the outfit and the government were watching the massive amounts of money being made off policy gambling. The Jones brothers were also policy kings. They were the best organized and were by far the biggest policy operators in the city. And these are their names: Edward Big Ed Jones, George Jones, and Mac Jones. In 1946, the Jones brothers sat at the top of a $25 million a year policy syndicate in Chicago. And along with all the money came some really bad things for the brothers. Kidnappings, death threats, corrupt politics, violence, and jail time were a big part of the brothers' lives. And because of their immense wealth, it shed the light on the brothers, and the feds were watching. And in 1941, they made their move. All were arrested, but Ed Jones took the fall for his brothers and was sentenced to 18 months in prison on tax evasion. And jail is where he met Sam Giancana. And Sam Giancana and him became friends. And Jones taught Giancana everything about the policy business. And when they got out of prison, Jones staked Giancana $100,000, and they went into business together. Over the next couple of years, Giancana made a fortune for himself and the outfit. And this pushed Giancana up the ladder within the outfit. Greed got the better of Giancana, and he decided friendship meant nothing. And years later, he forced Eddie Jones and his brothers out of the policy business. Giancana threatened Jones and told him, take the money and go to Mexico, or else. And that's exactly what he did, because the outfit at that time was just too powerful. In the 1950s, Accardo and Giancana decided they wanted it all, and the Chicago outfit started aggressively moving in on policy gambling on the south and west sides. Tony Accardo gave Sam Giancana the nod, and Giancana sent thugs like the Capone brothers, Cerrone, and many others out to wage war on policymakers. This war went on for years, and by the early 1950s, the Jones brothers were long gone and threatened into retirement, and the only one left standing was Teddy Rowe. Rowe was the last member of Chicago's Big 12 Policy Syndicate, organized in 1932. He fought the outfit tooth and nail, and when Giancana and Rowe met for the first time, it was clear they hated each other. And after their second meeting, Rowe and his men killed one of Giancana's men in a gunfight on the South Side after the outfit's botched kidnapping attempt. A few months later, the outfit retaliated and gunned down Rowe. And in 1952, the war was winding down, and it was won by the outfit. Or so they thought. Less than 2 weeks after Rowe's killing, Tony Accardo and Jake Guzik were indicted by the U.S. Attorney for failure to pay income tax on their policy revenue. Some speculated it was one of two reasons Teddy Rowe was killed. One, for killing Giancana's bodyguard, or two, because Rowe informed the feds on how to catch outfit policy operators evading taxes. Rowe testified at the Kefauver hearings and named prominent wheel operators that included two Chicago outfit mobsters. When Rowe was killed, it signaled the end of an era. The rule of black policy kings was over in Chicago. Theodore Rowe, a.k.a. Robin Hood, was laid to rest at Lincoln Cemetery on the South Side. The politicians in Springfield seen the money being made by the outfit, and in 1974, policy came to an end, and the state lawmakers took it away from the outfit when they launched the Illinois State Lottery. And just like that, the state became the new landlords of the policy game here in Illinois. And the state overzealously expanded it into a dozen different games and scratch-off ticket games. In the first year, the state brought in $150 million, and this was just the beginning. In 2019, the lottery generated approximately $3 billion in revenue. And over the past 47 years, it has brought in over $100 billion for the state of Illinois. The three men that created policy were very smart men. They didn't have a product, and yet they made millions. They didn't have to create a product, store a product, or ship a product like you would with cigarettes, alcohol, or drugs. And what they did was they set up one spot to take the bets and the money and another spot to pay out the winners. And there weren't very many winners. And a lot of policy millionaires were created during this time. And a lot of them were black policy millionaires. And that's why the outfit took it. And that's now why the state has it. By the turn of the century, Chicago had become the center of the horse racing world. Betting on horse racing is one of the oldest vices and one of the most corrupt sports in the history of Chicago. Residents first started watching the sport in the early 1830s, and by the 1930s, spectator horse racing became a huge attraction. And by the mid-1930s, the city of Chicago had 6 racetracks, more than any other city in the country. There was Lincoln Fields, Aurora Downs, Harlem Racetrack, Washington Park, Garfield Park, and Hawthorne Park. And over the next couple of decades, some would disappear and were replaced with new, more modern tracks like Sportsman's Park, Balmoral Park, Maywood Park, and Arlington Park. In the early years of racing, in September of 1891, the Chicago police raided Garfield Park Racetrack. They arrested jockeys, bookmakers, bettors, and managers. 33 people were arrested in this raid. 3 days later, on September 5th, 1891, 500 cops came back and raided the park again. and arrested 125 people for gambling. The next day, the mob killed 2 police officers, and a horse owner was killed. Tempers flared, and because of this, the track was closed by Reform Mayor Republican Hempstead Washburn in early 1892. And because of the violence and race fixing, but mainly the race fixing, horse racing was banned in Illinois from 1905 till 1927, when a bill legalizing pari-mutuel racing was passed by the Illinois legislature. Hawthorne Park opened in 1891. It was a home away from home to Al Capone. When Capone was chased out of Chicago in 1924 by Reform Mayor William Emmett, Capone took over the town of Cicero and set up headquarters at the Hawthorne Hotel. The hotel was a little over a mile away from Hawthorne Park. Capone and his bodyguards would regularly hop in the car, and off to the track they would go. Capone spent a lot of time gambling at the park in the Gold Cup room. It was rumored Capone was connected to the track owners and was involved in the building of Sportsman's Park. It was built right next door to Hawthorne Park. Capone was sending suitcases of cash to the contractor, building Sportsman's into a horse track. But it started out as a dog track and was run by Al Capone in the mid-1920s. Capone used to fix the races by feeding greasy hamburgers to every greyhound but the one he planned to bet on. Sportsmen sometimes held boxing matches between races up on the 3rd floor. Dog racing was illegal, and the track was quickly shut down. And in 1932, horse racing started at Sportsman's Park. Capone never got to see the horses run at Sportsman's Park because he was imprisoned for tax evasion in 1931. The involvement and consistent fixing of races by gangsters is what led to the state getting involved. Or so they said. Decades later, we now know this was a lie, because the race fixing continued, and decades later, it was clear this was all about the money, mainly the massive tax revenue being collected by the state. In 1927, Illinois lawmakers became the racetrack's partners. When they legalized betting, the state now had control of licensing fees and regulations, and they also had the tracks levy a tax on winners. And some of the politicians of the times invested in these tracks because up until 1990, it was the only place to gamble in the Chicagoland area, publicly and legally. The tracks were packed with people spending money for over 94 years, and the state made a fortune in tax revenue and capitalized all the way around by forcing racetrack owners to fill political campaign coffers with cash. It was a win-win for politicians and a win-lose for the bettors. Prohibition made the outfit millions, and this led to the modern structure that lasted for nearly 100 years. The rise of the Chicago outfit started on January 17, 1920, and what ended up being one hell of a New Year's present for what would soon become the Chicago outfit. The federal government gift-wrapped Prohibition for the mob. In the package was hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue from booze. And along with that came casino gambling, slots, sports betting, policy betting, prostitution, and drugs. Big Jim Colosimo was one of the outfit's first bosses. He reigned from 1910 to 1920, a total of 10 years. The violence started months after Prohibition kicked off, when gang boss Johnny Torrio and Al Capone decided to kill Big Jim Colosimo, a.k.a. Diamond Jim, for not allowing Torrio and Capone to expand into the manufacturing end of the bootlegging business. In May of 1920, the two brought in a hitter out of New York, Brooklyn crime boss Frankie Yale, to do the job. This takeover was the opening salvo in what would become 13 years of hell for the city of Chicago. Over the 13 years of Prohibition, hundreds were murdered and over 100 people were killed in bombings. Street warfare became part of everyday life here in Chicago. It was in fact Johnny Torrio that purchased the first Tommy guns used in the street warfare here in Chicago to enforce territory disputes related to operational expansion. The big money was in the bootlegging aspect. Taking control of abandoned breweries, warehouses, and trucks were essential to feed the appetite of the thousands of speakeasies set up across the city. At first, there were dozens upon dozens of gangs operating independently throughout the city, and violence was the only way to consolidate the gangs under one flag, the Capone flag. And along with the millions of dollars came massive corruption. Police corruption and political corruption that had not been seen before or after Prohibition. A forgotten figure in gang history was the head of the Chicago branch of the Sicilian Union, Mike Merlo. He was a bootlegger who used his position at the Union to mediate disputes among the Chicago gangs, and he kept the peace for the first 4 years of Prohibition. When Merlo died of cancer on November 8, 1924, his death reignited warfare across the city. Lombardo, a Capone ally, became the new head of the Chicago branch. Lombardo was no Mike Merlo, and because Capone got his guy in, it angered Aiello. And years later, Joe Aiello would take action against Tony Lombardo. Over the next 9 years, high-profile killings of rivals like Dean O'Banion and many others would become the norm here in Chicago. On November 10, 1924, Frankie Yale found O'Banion clipping chrysanthemums in the back room of his flower shop. Frankie Yale walked up, introduced himself, and shook his hand. He held his grip firm, and gunman John Scalise and Albert Anselmi fired 2 bullets into O'Banion's chest and throat. One of them fired a single shot in the back of his head as he laid on the floor. The killing of O'Banion sparked years of bad blood that would run red through the streets of Chicago. The reason O'Banion was killed was because he set up Torrio during a brewery purchase. In January of 1925, retribution for the O'Banion killing came. Capone was ambushed at the Hawthorne Hotel, leaving him shaken but unhurt. 12 days later, on January 24th, Torrio was returning from a shopping trip with his wife when he was shot several times by Jaime White, Bugs Moran, and Zucchi. After recovering, he resigned and handed control to Capone. Johnny Torrio reigned as boss from 1920 to 1925, a total of 5 years. Capone became the new boss, and just like that, a $60 million a year organization fell into his lap. Al Capone reigned as boss from 1925 to 1931, a total of 6 years. The new North Side gang leader, Jaime Weiss, demanded vengeance for O'Banion's death, and he went after Capone allies. He started with the Jenna brothers. On May 26, 1925, Angelo Jenna was shot by 3 North Side gang members and died in a hospital. As he lay dying, he refused to name his shooters. And Mike Jenna was killed by police a few weeks later, while Anthony Jenna was murdered by the North Side gang a couple of months later. Angelo's brother-in-law, Henry Spignoli, was killed the following year. And that was it. The rest of the Jennas fled Chicago, and returned to Sicily. Jaime Weiss, the new leader of the North Side Gang, was killed on October 11, 1926. Weiss and his entourage were pulling up in a car and were crossing the street next to Holy Name Cathedral when machine gunners from across the street, up on the second floor, opened fire. Weiss was shot 10 times and later died at a hospital. 5 were shot in this incident and 2 were killed. The next North Sider to be killed was Vincent the Schemer Drucci. He was killed by cops on April 4th, 1927. Drucci was killed sitting in a squad car by Detective Dan Healy. Some say Dan Healy was on the Capone payroll, and his job was to get rid of opposing mobsters. In fact, Healy, who hated all gangsters, probably had some rough remarks in the car towards Drucci, who probably went ballistic and tried to get Healy's gun. It resulted in Healy wresting the gun from Drucci and shooting him to death. Tony Lombardo, head of the Sicilian Union, was killed on September 7, 1928. Joseph Lombardo was suspected in the slaying of Tony Lombardo. He was a bodyguard for Lombardo. They claim he set it up. He claims he was shooting at the shooters as they were shooting at Lombardo. Joseph Ferraro was also killed in this incident. 8 years after Frankie Yale murdered Big Jim Colosimo, on July 1st, 1928, Frankie Yale was killed in New York. He was chased down by 5 Capone gunmen in his car. When he crashed, they opened fire on him, killing him. Cops repeatedly questioned Capone about the Yale murder, but nothing ever came of it. Yale's murder was never solved. This was the first time that the Thompson submachine gun was used in a New York gangland hit. Yale's killers were said to be Capone gunmen Tony Accardo, Fred the Killer Burke, Gus Winkler, George Shotgun Ziegler, Louis Little New York Campagna. Most of these hitmen are believed to have participated in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre 7 months later. By far the biggest bloody climax of Prohibition-related killing came on February 14, 1929, when 7 associates of the Moran Gang, one of Capone's longtime enemies, were shot to death by 2 men dressed as policemen and 2 dressed as gangsters. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre remains an unsolved crime and was never officially linked to Capone. Bugs Moran and the Moran Gang faded away after this, and that was the last major hurdle for Capone. It was said these Capone gunmen were responsible for the killing of these 7 men: Tony Accardo, Fred the Killer Burke, Gus Winkler, and George Shotgun Ziegler. Over the years, there have been disputes between law enforcement and historians as to the participation by Tony Accardo in the murder of Frankie Yale and the murder of 7 on St. Valentine's Day. The men that were directly connected to these events are all dead, and because of this, we will never know for sure. The 2 Tommy guns used in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and the one used in Yale's murder were found in the possession of Fred the Killer Burke. The guns were definitively ballistically linked to both of these crimes, and they were found in Burke's hideout after he was arrested for killing a Michigan cop. He pled guilty to the cop killing and kept his mouth shut and never admitted to anything related to Yale or the massacre. He never stood trial for either of these crimes and died in jail in 1940. The last high-profile killing of the Prohibition era was Joe Aiello. He was killed on October 23, 1930. He was a Chicago bootlegger who had a long-standing blood feud with the Chicago outfit and boss Al Capone. Capone gunmen ambushed him as he exited a Chicago apartment building where he had been hiding out. They shot him 59 times. It is said Louis Campagna is suspected of putting together the hit on Aiello. Some say he was the shooter. We'll never know. Giuseppe Aiello was killed because he was the chief architect in the murder of Sicilian Union boss Tony Lombardo. On October 17, 1931, Capone was found guilty on 22 counts of federal income tax evasion and was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He was sent to Atlanta federal prison first and then sent to Alcatraz. On November 16, 1939, Al Capone was released after having served 7 years, 6 months, and 15 days. He paid all his fines and back taxes, and Al Capone never returned to Chicago. Suffering from syphilis, he had deteriorated greatly during his confinement. Once released from the Rock, Capone went to his Florida home on Palm Island, and 8 years later, on January 25, 1947, he died. Al Capone never returned to Chicago alive, but his body was sent back to Chicago, and he was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery and later moved to the family plot at Mount Carmel. Over Al Capone's 12-year involvement with the outfit, authorities claim he is responsible for hundreds of murders. Politicians realized outlawing alcohol was a failure on many levels. Some claim the murders and corruption played a role in the reversal in policy that took place on December 5, 1933, when the 21st Amendment was ratified. In this proclamation from President Roosevelt, the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment of January 16, 1919, ending the unpopular nationwide prohibition of alcohol. When Prohibition officially ended, the gangsters had the trucks, warehouses, and in some cases the breweries. Some sold their equipment for pennies on the dollar, and others opened legitimate distributorships because booze was big business. Politicians also became big investors in these distributorships. And this was based on their own policy. And over the next 70-plus years, the outfit was completely pushed out of the alcohol business. This is where the outfit's future leadership came from, the 42 Gang. These guys would run the rackets across Chicago for decades. The 42 Gang is one of the oldest gangs in Chicago. It was a teenage street gang that started during Prohibition. The 42 Gang served as a teen farm team for future members of the Chicago outfit. These are just a few of the 42 gang members, including future upper echelon members of the Chicago outfit. Sam Mooney Giancana, Sam Teets Battaglia, Luigi Cockeyed Louis Fratto, Felix Milwaukee Phil Eldoricio, Mad Sam DiStefano, Charles Chucky Nicoletti, Fiore Fifi Buccieri, William Smokes Aloisio, Frank Skid Caruso, William Willie Potatoes Dedadano, Joey DeVarco, Marcello Caifano, Mario DiStefano, Bruno Tassione, Jackie Cerrone, and Butch Blassie. In 1931, of the original members, over 30 had been killed or imprisoned on a variety of charges, including murder, armed robbery, and sexual assault. The gang operated and had members in Italian neighborhoods across the city. The gang became notorious for committing every crime on the list, and the 42 gang soon emerged as one of the most violent gangs in the city. But they suffered heavy losses due to wars with rival gangs. The gang also had a high rate of arrests for murders of robbery victims, suspected informants, and police officers. When I was a young man, I used to work with my grandfather, and one of his friends was an original 42 gang member, and he was a heavyweight in the outfit. He ran the neighborhood of Bridgeport for a long time, and his name was Frank Caruso, and his street name was Skid. When I was a kid, we had a shop. My cousins had a shop in the garage in the back, and that was a few doors down from Mr. Caruso's house. And my grandfather used to go over there and do a little work. My grandfather would walk in and he would greet him and be happy to see him. And then he'd see me behind him lugging his tools. And they would talk while he would work, and he would watch us. And he always told me that I should get an honorable profession. And he always said my grandfather was an honorable man. And that word, honorable, didn't mean much to me back then, but it means something to me today. He used to tell me, your grandfather's an honorable man. Being a craftsman, carpenter is an honorable profession. You should listen and learn from him, because he's the best. And he always used to give me, $20 every time I'd go there, which was a handful of times over the years. Between him and my grandfather, I think Mr. Caruso was born in 1911. My grandfather was born in 1915. So they lived through the Capone era, Nitti, Giancana, and nobody knew better than Mr. Caruso what it was all about. And I think he was trying to warn me about the influences that were taking place in the Bridgeport community, because there were gangsters everywhere in the 70s when I was growing up. And all the young guys wanted to be like them. And I'm thinking back now that it was a warning. That it was a warning to stay away from it, because I believe in his old age he had a change of heart. And my grandfather wanted to teach me, because he didn't want that for me. And he took a lot of time and patience to teach me a lot of things. I didn't go quite down the road they thought I would. When my grandfather died, I regretted that I did not take the time to finish learning from the greatest teacher I would ever have. And they were both right. And I wish now I had listened. That's for sure. It was a warning that went unheeded. In 1931, both Nitti and Capone were convicted of tax evasion and sent to prison. Nitti received an 18-month sentence, while Capone was sent away for 11 years. While Frank Nitti was gone, Paul the waiter Rica held the reins. And when Nitti was seated, he immediately encountered problems. On the afternoon of December 19, 1932, Mayor Cermak's Special Police Detail, headed by Detective Sergeants Harry Lang and Harry Miller, raided Nitti's headquarters. Lang fired 5 shots, hitting Nitti 3 times. Nitti would survive, but he was charged with attempted murder. Lang actually shot and grazed himself in the neck to make it look good. Lucky for Nitti, it was later exposed at trial as a setup, by Lang and his crew on orders from Mayor Anton Cermak. Detective Lang was never charged in this shooting, and Nitti now knew the mayor wanted him dead and sent the cops to try and kill him. There was another hard lesson Nitti would learn. No one man is more important than the preservation of the outfit. Months later, on February 15, 1933, Mayor Anton Cermak was attending a campaign event for Roosevelt in Miami, Florida. Cermak was standing next to Roosevelt, and Cermak was gunned down, and on March 6th, he died from his wounds. This incident was reported by the press to be an assassination attempt on Roosevelt. Chicago reporter Walter Winchell claimed the outfit sent Zangara to kill Cermak for trying to kill Nitti, and also wanted to send a message to all politicians that did not want to fall in line. After Cermak's death, the message was sent loud and clear, and no Chicago mayor would publicly condemn outfit leaders, their politicians, judges, or cops. 14 days after Cermak's death, assassin Giuseppe Zangara was executed in the arms of Old Sparky, the famed electric chair at the Florida State Prison at Rayford. It was one of the quickest trials and executions in American history. There's a strong possibility there was no involvement in Cermak's death by the Chicago outfit and boss Frank Nitti. Either way, the outfit benefited from people thinking they had killed Cermak. And this put fear into all politicians in Chicago for decades to come. Their motto was, "Go along or else." Mayor Cermak was laid to rest at Bohemian National Cemetery on the north side of Chicago. After Cermak's death, Nitti immediately expanded operations and set out to fill the void in the lost revenue from booze. So he turned the outfit's focus to the labor unions, mainly in California. Nitti and other bosses over the next 60 years would keep the old school rackets intact. They still had casino gambling, the sports book, slot machines, prostitution, and drugs, and they were making headway into the labor unions here in Chicago. In the early 1940s, Nitti made a big mistake when he took the Capone reputation to Hollywood in a failed attempt to extort the film studios. Nitti convinced the outfit leadership his takeover plan would work. Chicago mobster Johnny Roselli gained control of the Projectors Union and threatened the studios with strikes and other labor problems if they did not pay up. After the Projectors Union takeover was complete, Nitti sent Willie the Pimp B off to Hollywood to start extorting the film studios. Beoff immediately got himself in trouble, and to stay out of jail, started cooperating with law enforcement. And that resulted in indictments against several high-ranking members of the Chicago outfit. In 1943, the upper echelon of the Chicago outfit was indicted for extorting the Hollywood film industry. Phil D'Andrea, Louis Little New York Campagna, Nick Circella, Charles Cherry Nose Gio, Rika, and Johnny Roselli were all accused of extorting money from the movie studios, including Columbia Pictures, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, Paramount Pictures, RKO Pictures, and 20th Century Fox. Willie the Pimp Beoff was placed in the Witness Protection Program, but resurfaced 12 years later in Vegas under the name William Nelson. He was recognized, and the outfit quickly took its revenge for ratting them out. A bomb was placed in his car, and there was nothing left of him or his car. On December 30th, 1943, Rika and his associates were convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years each in federal prison. Rica began his sentence at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. And Frank Nitti, a very powerful man in the Chicago outfit, died sitting in the grassy mud of an Illinois Central Railroad line in North Riverside on March 19, 1943. He was 62 years old. Frank Nitti, a.k.a. Frank the Enforcer Nitti, was laid to rest at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. Sam Giancana was the front man that led the policy takeover and opened the door to the Teamsters Bank and used it to expand gambling internationally for the bosses. Sam Giancana was the boss of the outfit for 9 years, from 1957 to 1966. After the death of Nitti, Rica, with the assistance of Accardo, ran the outfit into the 1950s. As the 50s began, Rica started passing more of the day-to-day operation of the outfit to Accardo. In 1957, Rica suddenly told Accardo that he wanted Sam Giancana, a Rica protege, to take Accardo's position. Accardo was facing tax evasion charges, and Rica allegedly wanted him to disappear from the public view. Although unhappy with the demotion, Accardo accepted it, joining Rica in semi-retirement. However, it was understood that Giancana had to get Accardo and Rica's approval for all major transactions, particularly hits. Giancana joined the 42 gang. It was a juvenile street crew, and he worked for political boss and gangster Joe Esposito. Giancana was considered to be a great wheelman, a big earner, and a vicious killer. After Giancana murdered his boss Esposito, the 42 gang became an extension of the outfit. The outfit leadership was very weary at first of the 42 members. They thought they were a bit too wild. But Giancana's reputation got him noticed by Frank Nitti, Paul Rica, and Tony Accardo. Giancana did multiple prison terms in Joliet, Leavenworth, and Terre Haute Federal Prison. By the time he was 20 years old, he was the prime suspect in 3 murders. Over his criminal career, he is suspected in ordering and participating in dozens of murders. And 32 years later, he would become the boss of the Chicago outfit. In 1957, Giancana was now the head of the outfit, and his first priority was to consolidate illegal lottery rackets in Chicago. He did this successfully and filled the outfit's pockets with millions. Giancana did this through murdering those who did not go along with the program. Giancana was a natural-born killer. He was a bit more sadistically violent than Capone and Nitti combined. The first disaster for Giancana took place when he attended the National Summit of Mob Bosses, held in Appalachian, New York. He was the outfit's representative at the summit that ended up exposing the piracy of the nationwide syndicate that Hoover claimed did not exist. After the raid, Buffalo crime boss Stefano Magaddino and Giancana were overheard on a wiretap, saying the meeting should have occurred in the Chicago area. Giancana claimed that the Chicago area was the safest place in the world for a major underworld meeting because he had several police chiefs on his payroll. Giancana frequently spent time away from Chicago and invested in Las Vegas, as well as in offshore casinos in Iran, Cuba, and Great Britain. Following the death of his wife Angeline in 1954, Giancana was linked to a series of attractive women, including the singer Phyllis McGuire and call girl Judith Exner, a woman who he allegedly would share with the future president, John F. Kennedy. Claims have been made over the decades that Sam Giancana and the outfit were responsible for handing the presidential election to John F. Kennedy. Because of his father's past ties to Chicago during Prohibition. Nothing could be further from the truth. The outfit leadership hated the Kennedy brothers and viewed them as spoiled rich kids that couldn't be trusted to leave them alone. The outfit backed Richard Nixon for president, and when Kennedy won, big problems came for the outfit. But one of President Kennedy's first steps when he took office was to appoint his mob-hating brother, Robert Kennedy, to Attorney General. And one of Robert's priorities was going after Ricardo, Rica, Giancana, and all top echelon mobsters. About the same time that Bobby Kennedy was waging war on the outfit, Giancana and another mob boss, Santo Trafficante, were contacted by the CIA in a complex plot to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Castro kicked the mob out of Cuba after his 1959 revolution. Chicago outfit associate Johnny Roselli was also involved, and he was the go-between in the CIA plot. During Giancana's reign, the violence escalated, and for years cops kept finding people murdered in the trunks of their cars. It was in fact Giancana that started leaving the bodies in the trunks of cars, after the outfit tortured and murdered the victims, and others were being blown up in car bombings. These terror tactics were used a lot during Sam Giancana's term as boss. Under the reigns of Nitti and then Giancana, the bodies just kept piling up. The first documented involvement by the Chicago outfit in Las Vegas started with enforcer Marshal Caifano. In the 1940s, Caifano was sent to Los Angeles by Paul Rica and Tony Accardo. This started the Las Vegas partnership between the Chicago outfit and the New York mob. And it started at Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills home with Caifano associate Alan Smiley. Smiley was there when Siegel was shot to death by another man. And soon after, Gus Greenbaum, the Chicago outfit's chief bookie, arrived at Siegel's Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and said, "We're taking over." And the outfit now had their foot in the door. Marshal Caifano ran the juice loans and street rackets in Las Vegas for nearly 2 decades. And he was suspected of several unsolved killings, including the 1950 murder of former Chicago police lieutenant William Drury, and the 1952 strangulation murder of mobster Russian Louis Strauss, and the 1973 shotgun killing of police officer Richard Kane. In 1943, Caifano associate Nick Circella was facing an extortion trial. Circella's girlfriend, Estelle Carey, a former Dice girl, was about to cooperate with federal prosecutors. Days later, her burned, battered, and ice-picked body was found in a North Side apartment building at 512 West Addison. Caifano was a prime suspect in this murder, but the case was never solved. In the 1950s, Giancana and Caifano pushed out the last black policy king, Theodore Roe. Giancana's guys tried to kidnap Roe and killed Caifano's brother in the process, Leonard Fat Lenny Caifano. Leonard Caifano was Sam Giancana's boyhood pal and bodyguard. Teddy Roe and 4 of his bodyguards, 3 of which were off-duty Chicago cops, were forced off the road by Lenny Caifano. With him was his brother Marshal Caifano and Vincent Lally. Lenny Caifano pulled a gun, and a gun battle ensued, and Roe's bodyguards pulled out shotguns and ended up killing Lenny Caifano. After Fat Lenny's murder, Sam Giancana, with the full power of the outfit behind him, led a month-long terror campaign through the black neighborhoods of Chicago, where Rowe was hiding out. Dozens were shot at or blackjacked. A lot of black hoodlums simply disappeared, and others just left town forever. Rowe was holed up in his mansion on South Michigan Avenue, protected by a small army of bodyguards. But it was over, and he knew it. And on August 1st, 1952, Rowe was told by doctors that he had incurable cancer. And after that, Rowe stopped hiding. He dismissed his bodyguards, and on August 4th, 1952, he dressed in a three-piece suit and hat and strolled down Michigan Avenue. They killed him with 8 shots to the head before he reached the other side of the street. And Marshall Caifano was the prime suspect in this killing and many other unsolved killings. By the 1950s, more outfit-connected casinos began to pop up on the Strip. There was the Sands, the Dunes, the Riviera, the Tropicana, and the Stardust. Most of these casinos were financed or refinanced with millions of dollars in loans from the mob-dominated Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. Mo Dalitz was close to Teamsters Union President Jimmy Hoffa, and Mo played an instrumental role in helping secure some of these early loans to mob families across the country. Mo was referred to as Mr. Las Vegas. He would usher the mob into the 20th century in Vegas. In the late 1960s, Caifano's legal troubles caught up with him, and this would force Rica Nicardo and Giancana to replace Caifano with enforcer Anthony Spilatro in 1971. And this was the beginning of the windfall that was to come for the outfit over the next decade and a half. Giancana had become a problem for the bosses. He was fast becoming a celebrity of sorts, and he was out in the public view, shoulder to shoulder with stars, and his face was in the papers every day. And this violated Ricardo and Rica's low-key policy. In 1965, Giancana was convicted of contempt of court. He served 1 year in prison. After his release from prison, Giancana fled to Mexico. And in 1970, an FBI wiretap picked up Michael Corbett, the corrupt police chief of Willow Springs, and mobster outfit capo Salvatore Bastone, discussing Tony Spilatro's role in the murder of Giancana. Sam sure loved the little guy in Oak Park. Talking about Tony Spilatro. Yeah, he was effing crazy about him. Sam put Tony on the map. Thought he was going to be a big effing man someday. Did you know that after Marshall Caifano got out of Las Vegas, it was Sam who wanted Tony Spilatro out there? Even lately, with all the problems with the skim and all, Sam always stood behind the guy. Tony was over to Sam's house all the time. He lived right by there. Did you know Tony even figured out a way where he could get in through the back of Sam's place without anybody seeing him? He'd go through other people's yards, go over fences, all sorts of crap. When Corbett asked for the reason for the murder, Bastone said, "There's never just one reason for what happened to Sam. There's a million of them. Let's just say Sam should have remembered what happened to Bugsy Siegel." And that was it for Sam Mooney Giancana. Sam Giancana was interred next to his wife Angeline in the family mausoleum at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. The next chapter covers the outfit bosses and the murder of their top loan shark, and a rogue outfit burglary crew that robbed the wrong man's house, and covers the outfit's multi-million-dollar chop shop racket that caused an internal war that cost many lives.